Hello and a very warm welcome to all of you listening. You're joining me today as we continue on with our journey through the book of Genesis. Today we're going to look at the story of Abram in Egypt, and our reading is verses 10 to 20 of chapter number 12. So this is Genesis chapter number 12, verses 10 to 20. Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to dwell there, for the famine was severe in the land. And it came to pass, when he was close to entering Egypt, that he said to Sarai his wife, Indeed, I know that you are a woman of beautiful countenance. Therefore it will happen, when the Egyptians see you, that they will say, This is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will let you live. Please say, You are my sister, that it may be well with me for your sake, and that I may live because of you. So it was, when Abram came into Egypt, that the Egyptians saw the woman, that she was very beautiful. The princes of Pharaoh also saw her, and commended her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. He treated Abram well for her sake. He had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male and female servants, female donkeys and camels. But the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. And Pharaoh caught Abram and said, What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say, She is my sister? I might have taken her as my wife. Now, therefore, here is your wife. Take her and go your way. So Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. This is the word of the Lord. In today's study, we're going to look at the story of Abram and his flight to Egypt in order to avoid a famine. It's a very interesting story, and one that I'm sure you're going to enjoy. As we shall see shortly, it was actually a faith test. Spoiler alert, it was a test that Abram failed. But all that is to come. Before we look at today's passage, let's review the main points from last week's sermon. Last week we looked at Abram's move from Haran and his journey south through the land of Canaan. Abram, it seems, had been quite happy living in Haran with his father Terah, his wife Sarai, and his nephew Lot. Life was good. Abram had done well for himself. He had accumulated a great many possessions and a considerable fortune. He had a nice collection of Italian sports cars, the latest widescreen TV, a Rolex watch, and a deluxe espresso machine. From a worldly perspective, there was no need for him to leave. Why venture off on a dangerous and wholly unpredictable journey? He could dwell in Haran and live a comfortable and prosperous life. Often success and comfort can be major hindrances in our Christian lives. When life is going well and we have everything we need, we begin to think, often subconsciously, that we don't need God. Since I am able to obtain all that I need through my own efforts or industry, my trust and reliance on God diminishes. We are all, I'm afraid, sadly liable at times to fall into this way of thinking. It's only when life becomes challenging, or when we face seasons of trials or difficulties, that we realise our inability to remedy our own circumstances. It's at this point that we recognise our dependence upon God and place our trust and faith in Him. This is often why God chooses to test us. He wants to break us of our foolish self-reliance and bring us into dependence upon Him. So staying put in Haran was not God's plan for Abram. God had called him to journey on into Canaan. He had received this call back when he had been living in in Mesopotamia. This was because God planned to create a great nation from his descendants, and their home was to be in the land of Canaan. The catalyst to finally get Abram moving was the death of his father. Upon the death of Terah, Abram, at the sprightly age of 75, gathered up his possessions, hired a U-Haul truck, and set off south. Once they reached Shechem, Abram paused. Now clearly they must have stopped and camped somewhere along the way, since it's a 650-kilometre journey from Haran. But Shechem is mentioned in particular because of exactly what happened here. Abram went as far as the terebinth, or the oak tree of Moreh, and he made camp. As I said to you last time, this was probably a significant pagan worship site. Single trees or groves of trees situated in high places were often used as places of worship for the many pagan idols that were worshipped. Since high places were geographically closer to the heavens, the dwelling place of the gods, it was believed that communication was much easier in such places. It was in this particular place, then, that God appeared to Abram. He tells him that the land that he sees all around him is to be given to his descendants. Abram's response to this is one echoed by many biblical characters who encounter God. He builds an altar in order to worship the Lord. We're also reminded that the land was not empty. It was full of unfriendly Canaanites. No doubt they didn't take too kindly to Abram wandering around and telling them that this land was promised to him and to his descendants. However, God protected him and kept him safe as he traversed from north to south. From Shechem he moves to the mountain east of Bethel. He pitches his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east, and he again builds an altar. Following this, he again travels south into the Negev desert region, and it's at this point that we will pick up the story today. Verse number 10. Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to dwell there, for the famine was severe in the land. Let me take you back to your school, college, or university days. Now, I don't want to trigger any horrible bedded trauma, but do you remember having to sit tests or examinations? When your future prospects rested upon the result, they were incredibly stressful. I'm sure none of us miss preparing for and sitting exams. Although students universally dislike them, tests are valuable and useful tools. They provide students with an opportunity to truly or properly gauge whether they really know a subject. You might think that you have all the necessary knowledge at your fingertips, but until you are sitting alone in that exam room, how could you ever really know for sure? Teachers know this to be true. Recently I gave all my grade 4 students a one-on-one speaking test. There was nowhere for my students to hide. They either answered my questions and passed the test, or stayed dumb and failed. I was pleasantly surprised. They all performed very well. In our passage today, we will see Abram facing an examination of his own. God was administering a faith test. Just like with an academic test, perhaps Abram thought himself to be well prepared and ready. He probably believed that his faith was rock solid, that nothing could shake it. As a result, he'd passed the test without any kind of problem. But that is not exactly how things transpired. But let's not jump too far ahead of ourselves. Let's begin by summarizing Abram's recent history. Up until this point in the story, things have gone fairly well for Abram in Canaan. He's travelled the length of the country without any serious issues. None of the Canaanite tribal groups have harassed or attacked him. This has afforded him the opportunity to view the land and to properly assess its merits. He's also managed to find food and water for his dependents and for his many flocks. Even more significantly, God has appeared to him and promised him that this land is for him and his descendants to possess and to enjoy. Abram, in response, has built altars and presumably thanked God for his many blessings. But now he faces a serious problem, a serious test. The test comes in the form of a severe famine. In the ancient world, particularly in certain dry or elevated areas, famine was a recurring problem. Today, of course, with modern pipes and water storage systems, we are able, in many or most cases, to prevent or minimize the effects of famine. But in the ancient world, especially in an area dependent upon rainfall, as Israel is, a prolonged dry spell can be catastrophic. Interestingly, Abram, as we all know, came from Ur in southern Mesopotamia. It was a river port city, which meant that watering crops and growing food was seldom a problem. so in all likelihood Abram had never experienced a severe famine. The upper part of Egypt around the Nile Delta is similar, geographically speaking, to Ur. It was therefore quite logical that given the famine in Canaan, that Abram would think about going to Egypt. He'd probably heard that the famine had not touched Egypt. Therefore he plans to dwell or sojourn there for a while. Not a permanent move, you understand, but just until the famine was over. As the head of the family, it fell upon him to provide for those under his care and protection. There was his wife, Sarai, Lot, all their servants, and the numerous flocks to consider. It was right then that Abram be concerned about all of these things. But here's the problem. God had made a promise to Abram. The promise concerned the land of Canaan. God had given him this land, and this was where he was supposed to be. Abram's faith, however, wavered. Instead of trusting that God would provide for him where he was in Canaan, Abram decided that he knew best. So the very first test that God gave him was as follows. Do you trust or have faith that I will look after you in the place that I have told you to be? Abram, I'm afraid, failed this test. Well, let's continue. Verse number 11. And it came to pass, when he was close to entering Egypt, that he said to Sarai his wife, Indeed I know that you are a woman of beautiful countenance. As they approach the Egyptian border, Abram becomes concerned. As he glances across at his wife, Sarai, it dawns on him that she's a very attractive woman. The Hebrew expression that's used here, if translated literally, means a person of beautiful appearance. I encourage all of the husbands listening to remind their wives of this from time to time. But in this instance, Abram isn't merely stating a matter of fact. It occurred to him at this point that his wife's beauty might cause him a serious problem. I know what you're thinking. Just how attractive was she? Now we know that Abram was 75 years old at this time, making Sarai around about 65. Now, as we all know, many 65-year-old women can be beautiful and attractive. But the reality is that today time takes its toll, and after more than 6 decades, some of the youthful vigour and beauty has indeed faded. That, I'm afraid, is just the sad reality of living as we do in a fallen world. But that's not quite the full picture. Let me put things into perspective. At that time, the lifespans were a little bit longer than they are today. The Bible tells us that Sarai would live to be 127. So at the age of 65, she was the equivalent of being middle-aged, perhaps the equivalent of being around 35 to 40 today. The Jewish sources all describe Sarai in glowing terms. One source says that no Jewish bride or virgin that passed underneath the canopy, got married, could be compared with Sarai. Another says that God spent 33% of all women's beauty on just Sarai alone. She had, at least as the legends go, the perfect face and figure. She is said to be one of the most exquisitely beautiful women of all time. Abram, then, is clearly worried about her beauty. Let's read on and find out why. Verses 12 and 13. Therefore it will happen, when the Egyptians see you, that they will say, This is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will let you live. Please say, You are my sister, that it may be well with me for your sake, and that I may live because of you. As we've just established, Sarai is an attractive and therefore very desirable woman. Abram is concerned that when the Egyptians see her, that one of them may desire her for himself. It was the case that Egyptian men favoured Semitic women over Egyptian women. They found their appearance to be softer and more beautiful, and also there was the belief that Egyptian women faded rather early. They were beautiful in their youth, but they aged badly. I know that sounds a little harsh, but I'm merely reporting what was said at that time. So Abram is perhaps right to be concerned. A powerful Egyptian man might take a shine to Sarai, kill him and take her. This was not some silly or idle speculation. Abram was not just imagining a worse and unlikely case scenario. Egyptians at that time had a reputation for killing the husband and taking the wife for themselves. So Abram is understandably concerned about his own well-being. So he concocts a cunning plan. When they are questioned, Sarai is to say that Abram is her brother and not her husband. Actually, as you know, this is partly true. Sarai is Abram's half-sister. They shared the same father in Terah, but different mothers. However, as we all know, a half-truth is still a half-lie. Abram is asking his wife to lie. I'm sure I don't need to remind you that the scriptures warn us against telling lies. Leviticus 19:11 states, "You shall not steal, nor deal falsely, nor lie to one another." And Proverbs 12:22, "Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who deal truthfully are his delight." Nothing good comes either from telling lies yourself or in encouraging others to lie for you. Why then did Abram want Sarai to lie on his behalf? Saying that Abram was her brother would mean that he is not seen as an obstacle, a challenger, or a threat. The Egyptian would not need to kill him in order to take his wife away. In fact, as the male relative, he would be allowed to decline any potential marriage proposals. The time that such negotiations took would allow him time to escape. What Abram did not truly appreciate was that this was test number 2. God wanted to see whether Abram had the necessary faith that he would protect and preserve their union. Given that a future generation, the chosen people, would come from Sarai's womb, was it really likely that God would allow her to be defiled? Hardly. But Abram, I'm afraid, did not, it seems, have sufficient faith. He attempts then to outthink God and takes matters into his own hands. Well, let's continue. Verse 40. So it was, when Abram came into Egypt, that the Egyptians saw the woman, that she was very beautiful. Abram and Sarai, along with all of their entourage, are approaching the Egyptian border. They're hurrying to get their passports out and making sure that Abram has not exceeded the duty-free limit for cigarettes. It's the perfect time to tell you of a Jewish legend that developed around this particular border crossing. It's attributed to Rabbi Solomon ben Isaac, better known as Rashi. According to the legend, Abram decided to smuggle Sarai across the border in a large box, because of course there's nothing remotely suspicious about trying to carry a large locked chest across a national border. When the Egyptian customs officials inquired as to what the box contained, Abram told them that it was full of barley. This meant the lowest import tax. The custom officials were a little bit disappointed, so they decided to argue with him. They told Abram that they thought that the box probably contained wheat, meaning a little bit higher taxes. Abram promptly agreed to pay the custom tax for wheat. By now the officials were getting more than a little suspicious. "Are you sure there's no pepper inside?" they asked. "Okay," replied Abram. "I'll pay the charges for pepper." Then one of the more brighter officers suggested that there might be gold inside. Abram agreed instantly to pay the charges for gold. By now the custom officials were very suspicious. "I think there might be precious stones inside," said one of the officers. Without pausing, Abram said that he was quite happy to pay the necessary fees. By now the officers were insistent that the box must be opened. When the box was opened, all Egypt shone with the beauty of Sarai. It's a nice story, but we have no idea whether there is any truth at all to it. The Bible tells us that when the Egyptians in general, the common people, beheld Sarai, they were all astonished by her beauty. She was such a rare beauty that news of this wonderful woman soon spread to the Egyptian court. Well, let's read on. Verses 15 and 16. The princes of Pharaoh also saw her, and commended her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. He treated Abram well for her sake. He had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male and female servants, female donkeys, and camels. News of Sarai's beauty soon reaches the Pharaoh's court officials. They make a favourable report to the king, and he acts. We are told here that he takes Sarai into his house, more accurately into his harem. Since the Pharaoh was the most powerful man in the land, he did not need to negotiate or bargain for the rights to do this. Sarai most likely joined a large group of women that the king kept on hand. The passage doesn't reveal whether Pharaoh actually had sexual relations with Sarai as his wife, or that he was prevented from doing so by the affliction that's reported in the following verses. However, I do think it's highly unlikely that they did sleep together. As Egypt's ruler, he had many wives already. Sarai joined a house full of equally beautiful women. It was also the case that new wives had to undergo a period of purification before they had any kind of sexual relations with the king. The process of purification often lasted for several months. But much more importantly, given God's future intentions for Sarai, I think it highly improbable that he allowed her to be violated by a pagan king. Abram was rewarded well. The Pharaoh paid him the bride price. The ancient law code stated that if the father of the bride was dead, the brother became the legal guardian of any unmarried sister. So Abram did rather well out of the whole affair. Sarai had to go and live in the harem and face the possibility of being called to visit the Pharaoh at any time. Abram, on the other hand, received sheep, ox and donkey, servants and camels. He also presumably was allowed to live safely and in some degree of luxury. Just how rich did Abram really become? Well, according to ancient writings, an Arab sheikh was considered rich when he owned between 1 to 200 tents, from 60 to 100 camels, and 1,000 sheep and goats. The Bible tells us that Abram was very rich. As an aside, this was probably where Abram acquired the services of the servant Hagar. She'll go on to play a very important part in the story later. It's time now for the useless fact of the day. Are you ready? This is the first mention in Scripture of camels. For many years, scholars believed that the Bible was actually in error. They firmly believed that ancient people did not domesticate camels until much later than the patriarchal period. However, archaeological evidence for the early domestication of camels has proven these scholarly critics wrong. You won't be surprised then to learn that the Bible is indeed totally accurate. But let's read on and see how God intervenes in the story. Verse 17. But the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. Abram, as we've seen, was weak and failed God's tests. But God had made an unconditional promise to him. God, as I often tell you, is always a promise keeper. Even though Abram lacked faith, God was not going to abandon the promises that he had made. So God intervenes supernaturally and afflicts both the Pharaoh and his house with great plagues. The Bible does not reveal to us the exact nature of these plagues, but the rabbinic text does speculate. According to Rashi, in the rabbinic tradition, the plagues in view were a form of leprosy. The condition led to a debilitating skin disease that made sexual intercourse impossible. Apparently, the king and all the women in his house, except for Sarai, were affected. The fact that this condition did not affect Sarai gave Pharaoh the clue as to what was the real cause of this plague. Now, some of you listening might raise a question here regarding the fairness of all of this. After all, the Pharaoh was the victim here. He had been deceived by Abram and had no way of knowing that Sarai was married. So why was he afflicted and not Abram? Let's think this through very carefully. We should remember that God's purpose in these plagues wasn't to unfairly punish Pharaoh and his court, but to protect Sarai and to force Abram to own up to the truth. If God had not caused the plagues to come upon Pharaoh and his household, he may not have ever known that anything was wrong. This whole sorry situation may have been prolonged. It's highly doubtful, after all, that Abram would have come forward and admitted the deception. So how else was the issue to come to light? So you see, God's divine intervention was absolutely necessary in order to bring the situation to an end and effectively keep his covenant with Abram. But let's read on and see how Pharaoh reacts to all of this. Verses 18 and 19. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say, She is my sister? I might have taken her as my wife. Now therefore, here is your wife. Take her and go your way. The Egyptian king is quite rightly very annoyed. He summons Abram to him and demands to know why it was he lied. Now the question arises here is how exactly he found out about all of this. Now if we accept the skin disease hypothesis, then perhaps it becomes rather obvious. Why is it that everyone except Sarai has become sick? If, however, we decide to dismiss this idea, we are left to wonder how exactly he found out about this deception. Some wonder whether Sarai blurted it out by mistake, or perhaps that she confided in another woman who then talked to an official. Of course, it's certainly possible that this information was divinely revealed to the Pharaoh. However it happened, he now has a quivering Abram standing before him. He rebukes him by asking 3 direct questions. What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me she was your wife? Why did you say, She is my sister? We do not, of course, hear how Abram responded. Perhaps he very wisely kept his mouth shut and said nothing. The truthful answers to all 3 questions can be summed up as follows. Because I was a coward, who did not have adequate faith and trust in my God. I lied and deceived you because I feared what might happen to me. It's also worth pointing out the irony in this situation. The Egyptians, after all, were a pagan people. The Pharaoh, as we've seen, had a whole host of wives. Abram, by contrast, was a follower of Yahweh. God's design for marriage is 1 man and 1 woman, a concept very alien to the Egyptian elite. And yet here the Pharaoh has more respect, more regard for the institution of marriage than Abram. He was deeply concerned that he might have broken some kind of moral law by taking Sarai as his wife. It was seemingly not something Abram was deeply concerned about. The Pharaoh's response is to send them away. He wants them both out of his sight and out of his realm. Well, let's conclude today's study with the following verse. Verse number 20. So Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away, with his wife and all that he had. The whole sorry episode ends with Pharaoh returning Sarai to Abram, and then sending them both away with all they had. That's a very interesting addition. The king, of course, might have confiscated Abram's possessions and sent him away with nothing. He might even have imprisoned him for the lie. Instead, he was sent away with all that he had acquired. It might lead one to conclude that Abram got away relatively unscathed. He was rebuked by the king and sent away. But what happened in Egypt as a result of his disobedience to God would have serious repercussions in the future. Materially speaking, Abram did leave Egypt a rich man. But his increased flocks meant that he and Lot would later be forced to separate. During their time in Egypt, they had acquired a maid in Hagar. She would go on to bring division and sorrow into the home. Lot had been impressed by the riches and wealth that he had seen in Egypt. It made him covetous and greedy, which eventually brought tragedy to his family. So when all of these things are actually factored in, we can only really conclude that there were serious consequences for Abram's disobedience. That is always the case when we sin. God might forgive us when we repent and confess, but that does not necessarily mean that he removes the consequences for our sinful lives or acts. If a drunk driver kills a pedestrian and then asks God to forgive him, what happens? God in his grace does indeed wipe that sin away, but the driver still faces a prison sentence for his reckless act. Abram abandoned the altar that he had built and his faith in God, and relied upon his own schemes. We saw the disastrous consequences for doing that. But when we step back and look at the bigger picture, I think we see something very interesting. We see that God's promises to Abram, as made in the Abrahamic covenant, are being fulfilled. These unconditional promises stated that Abram would be blessed, despite his wrong and foolish choices. Fortunately, God's plans would not be diverted or thwarted by one man's poor decisions. It also said that those that curse God's people would be cursed, and Pharaoh, of course, fell foul of this. Lessons to learn. I've drawn 2 lessons from today's study. Number 1, faith in a time of famine. Abram found himself in a difficult situation. He was responsible for a large number of people and animals. A famine had arrived and hit the land. What was he to do? He could choose to stay where God had called him and promised to bless him, or he could try to come up with his own solution. We saw in today's account what he chose to do. He devised his own scheme and let his own fear of the famine dictate what he did. Instead of trusting the Lord and placing his faith in him, he trusted in his own instincts. As we saw, things did not go so well. Today our own personal tests come in many forms. Most of us will never be faced by a food famine, but we will all experience famines of other kinds. Trials or situations that come up in life that call upon us to make a choice. Will we have faith in God and rely upon him, no matter how hard it seems? Or will we, just like Abram, come up with our own scheme? Will we assume that we know better than God? I certainly hope not. It is through these testing times that our faith is honed and refined. So when tough times come, as they will as part of life in a sinful world, let us try to remain strong. Let us trust that the Lord is with us, and that he will never leave or forsake us. Number 2, you cannot share or model a faith you do not have. Abram is rightly recognized as being a mighty man of faith. However, at this particular point in his story, his faith is still rather small. As we saw, he didn't have sufficient faith in God to think that he could survive the famine. So off he went down to Egypt. Both Abram and Sarai had made a favourable impression on the Egyptians they met. Sarai was admired for her stunning beauty, and Abram was richly rewarded. However, when Abram's deception was discovered, what was the response? The Pharaoh kicked them out of the country. They left in a state of shame and disgrace. What a wonderful opportunity they had to be a living witness to the God that they served, and yet, due to their lack of faith, they made only an unfavourable impact. Today we all exist as living witnesses to the faith we hold. When we live good and godly lives, we present our faith well to others. Even if these people do not know that we are believers, they think that we are good, honest and reliable people. But if they know we follow Christ, they may question whether there is any kind of correlation between these things. Is he or she good because of the influence of Christ in their life? The answer, of course, should be a resounding yes. But equally, if we act in rude, shameful or undignified ways, we nullify our impact. We have people questioning what kind of religious person we are. Is this rude, lying, cheating person a real representative of Christianity? If so, I want nothing to do with it. We become like Abram, someone kicked out and ignored because of our conduct or attitude. Therefore, we should develop and cultivate our faith. We should seek to do all that we can to build upon what we have, so that we can share or model this faith effectively to others.
Now the Lord had said to Abram,
"Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed.
So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Then Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people whom they had acquired in Haran, and they departed to go to the land of Canaan. So they came to the land of Canaan. Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem, as far as the terebinth tree of Moreh. And the Canaanites were then in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram.
To your descendants I will give this land.
And there he built an altar to the Lord, who had appeared to him. And he moved from there to the mountain east of Bethel, and he pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord, and called on the name of the Lord. So Abram journeyed, going on still toward the south. Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to dwell there, for the famine was severe in the land. And it came to pass, when he was close to entering Egypt, that he said to Sarai his wife,
Indeed, I know that you are a woman of beautiful countenance. Therefore it will happen when the Egyptians see you that they will say, This is his wife, and they will kill me. But they will let you live. Please say you are my sister, that it may be well with me for your sake, and that I may live because of you.
So it was, when Abram came into Egypt, that the Egyptians saw the woman, that she was very beautiful. The princes of Pharaoh also saw her, and commended her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. He treated Abram well for her sake. He had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male and female servants, female donkeys, and camels. But the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. And Pharaoh called Abram and said,
What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister? I might have taken her as my wife. Now, therefore, here is your wife. Take her and go your way.
So Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had.